Hi, folks. This is Developmental Psychology, and this is Early Childhood 4 to 6, Part 1. So, the first thing to note is that this stage of life is characterized in general by being very curious about a wide range of things. You may know that children ask why a great deal during this time, asking at age 4 or 5, three to five, somewhere in there, that they want to know everything. Why is the sky blue? Why? Because there's particles in the air that absorb the light in that frequency. Why? Very quickly, you get to the depth of your own knowledge with children this age. They have new opportunities for interacting with other children. They clearly have more independence of thought and more complex and novel kinds of forces associated with socialization, like preschool, for one example. So they begin to learn, ultimately, that males and females grow up to be males and females. That little boys become men and little girls become girls, although there are some stages of this, aren't they? Let me go through a few definitions for you. Sex has to do with biologically linked features that are controlled genetically. But the word gender, although it's sometimes used interchangeably, is not the same. It includes gender, the cognitive, social, and emotional schemes within a person, and they're different from male and female. It has to do with the social expectations as well. Sexual orientation is something even different than those. Sexual orientation refers to the dominant direction of both sexual interest and emotional interest. Okay? Both. So you could be heterosexual and desire the physical aspects, the sexual aspects of sex with your own gender, but you're heterosexual. Or you could be homosexual as well, and in the opposite direction, and have sexual attraction to the opposite sex, but not emotional. Or the reverse. You could have emotional to the opposite gender if you're homosexual, or if you're heterosexual, you could have emotional desires towards the same gender. It's a little bit less common in that way. But orientation is both. So let's get that straight, and let's be very sure that we note that the phrase sexual preference is the wrong phrase. It's not that you just, I think I like women, or I think I like men. I prefer that. No, orientation, the predominant direction of your physical sexual desires and your emotional desires, it determines your orientation. So preference is the wrong word. The research is very clear now that orientation, although it's a very complex construct, is primarily due to biological/genetic contributions. And then the phrase sex role has to do with the patterns of behavior for your own gender. And these are basically standards that are set by society, you see. And so males and females have and are seen to have different resources, but laid on top of that are the things that we task them to do, and the roles that they occupy, and the way in which we see them as having different powers and attributes. That's also part of it, but a lot of that is artificially included from a social standpoint. Okay. So these sexual standards are connected to both culture and subculture. So what's appropriate for a male versus what's appropriate for a female? At one time, males were almost never nurses, and now that's not the case. At one time, almost no females were psychologists, and now the reverse is true. They overwhelmingly are females as psychologists are. So adults start laying this on kids from the get-go. They treat babies differently depending on whether they're male or female. Little boys are played with more roughly, for example. We're given different toys to play with. Boys get guns and army men, and girls get dolls and easy bake ovens. And so the way we interact with them, the way we reward them for incorrect versus correct behavior, based on what we think is correct or incorrect, and also the fact that we may punish incorrect behavior occurs from a very early age. Now, I want to talk about moral development, in particular Lawrence Kohlberg, who is, or was, the director of the Center for Moral Education at Harvard. He is not the only theorist on the development of morality. I would refer you to Carol Gilligan as well. I want to talk a little bit about Kohlberg's formulation, but not a lot. He had an invariant system. That is to say, you progress to a certain point, but you don't go backwards or forwards, and you go through the stages in an orderly fashion. You don't skip any. And it has to do with thinking, not action. We often think in a higher level of morality than we actually behave. So that's interesting. And you may find out, if you learn about this in a particularly deeper way, that many of the times people are arguing in our society, particularly about political and social and moral issues, they're actually arguing because each of them is maybe 2 stages away from each other in moral development, whereas one might be a 5 and one might be a 3 or a 4 and a 6 and so on, you see. That's very common to see once you learn these. So what is morality versus social convention? Morality is about the dignity, the rights, and the welfare of someone, and it's not contingent upon where you are or what you're doing. Social convention is about socially accepted norms for particular situations. They are situation-specific norms, like how you behave at a fancy dinner. That's not morality. That's social convention. Now, Kohlberg posed to many people, and his work has since been replicated, but does not hold up as well with females, I should tell you. Carol Gilligan argued this nicely. He gave them dilemmas and watched to see the reasoning that they offered for saying yes or no to a situation. The most famous one is the Heinz Dilemma, where a man whose wife is dying of cancer is asked whether, because he can't afford the drug that the druggist has, should he steal it. And it wasn't so much about whether the person said yes or no, but the reasoning that they used, okay? Now, he had 3 levels and 2 stages within each level of moral development. Level 1 he called the pre-conventional, level 2 the conventional, and the level 3 post-conventional. In level 1 there were 2 stages, stage 1 and 2. Stage 1 is the obedience and punishment level, where people argue things and think through things morally based on trying to avoid punishment. That's the level at which many criminals operate, the first level of pre-conventional reasoning. Stage 2 of level 1 is the self-interest. That's getting rewards. There may be a little bit of reciprocation. Scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. But it's still not doing things for the reason that they are morally correct to do or to not do, but to get rewards. So avoiding punishment lessens a bit, and rewards take the place. But that level 1 is often where criminals end up, and not beyond. Level 2 is got stage 3 and stage 4. So level 2, stage 3, is the conformity and interpersonal accord level. This is where somebody really wants everybody to get along, and they want friendly relations, and they really operate on being nice to everybody. That's stage 3. That's where a bunch of people end up in adulthood. And then stage 4, where a bunch more in adulthood end up and don't go beyond, is the authority and social order stage. This is about fixed rules and proper behavior to obey the laws of society. You can't do that because it's against the law. Okay, you got to do this because the law says you got to do this. And probably 2/3 of all adults, by some studies, end up at this level 2. Level 3, post-conventional, in other words, not typical, not usual, is stage 5 and stage 6. Stage 5 is social contract. So less about laws and more about the the reciprocity and utilitarian nature of rules, the greatest good for the greatest number of people, you see. So the rigidity of social rules and laws and so on is lessened quite a bit. And then stage 6 is where very, very few people reach, less than 2% of the population, it is thought. And this is the universal ethical principles stage. This is where empathy alone and the rights and welfare and dignity of all people is used to reason through moral dilemmas. So defending right and wrong is not just majority or for yourself. It's considering that all life is sacred. All life. Okay? So, let's talk about self-esteem. Self-esteem is about the gap between how you are now and what you're trying to achieve for yourself in the future. In other words, the goals you have for yourself in self-development. And we have 4 dimensions of us. We have a physical dimension, an emotional dimension, a cognitive dimension, and some would add, and I will, a spiritual dimension. The way we see ourselves fitting into the big picture of the world and the universe, right? And that can just be a belief system. It can be a cause. Mine is Habitat for Humanity and animal rescue and so on. So we have a real self, which is how you actually are now. And if you don't have major distortions, too high or too low in how you are, though we all have some distortions, that would lead to a higher self-esteem. If your ideal self, the goals you want to reach, are possible and desired by you, and if you're working to reach those in some way, then your self-esteem would be high. Self-esteem would be low if you have big distortions, high or low, in how you conceive of yourself. If you have ideal self goals that are impossible given your circumstances, or if you're not taking any steps in any way. So what's normal is for you to have dings and dents, because you can't work on everything. You're not without some distortions in how you are. So all of us have some dings and dents, right? A large negative self-esteem, very bad self-esteem, having self-esteem that's low in all areas, it's very, very rare, is usually the result of depression or things like that. And ultimately high self-esteem is also very rare in all situations, everywhere. No, there may be places, and usually are, where there are dings and dents. The American Association for University Women, have noticed for decades that girls have a large drop in self-esteem between elementary and high school. This has to do with impossible social standards for appearance. It has to do with the way in which we do not welcome the changes or celebrate the changes from being a girl to being a woman. The disparateness between the emotional development of both boys and girls and the physical development of boys and girls. Physical development, of course, outpacing emotional development by a long shot. And a lot of that has to do with inadequate education, both by families and by cultural elements like schools. So boys also show a decline, but it's not as significant, it's not as drastic as it is for girls. This is one reason why girls at about 10-to-1 develop eating disorders. Partly that's why. So let's talk about group play. So the way that kiddos play in this 3, 4, and 5 age range is that they have more structure in their play. There are more rules. There's more reality bound. But they still don't like teams. They're not in it for competition. They're in it for cooperation. And so they play the games over and over again. They repeat the games. They may have 1 or 2 or 3 games they play over and over and over again. Because they get the thrill out of the cooperation. So you don't want, as a parenting rule of thumb, you don't want to put kids in competitive team sports unless those teams are not about scoring, but are developing physical skills and camaraderie and so forth. You wouldn't want to keep score, for example. You wouldn't want to declare a winner and a loser. But you also don't want to reward everybody for everything. Don't want to do that either, you see. Friendship groups are more based on the exchange of concrete items and mutual enjoyment. So it would be, a friend is somebody that loans you their truck. Someone that's not your friend wouldn't let you play with their truck. So they evaluate friends on the basis of outcome, not intention. As adults, we have some element of outcome over time, but most of it's about intention. And these groups that kids play in are segregated by gender. Boys play with boys, and girls play with girls. Now, boys and girls are different. Boys are more physically assertive and girls are more verbally persuasive. Boys make direct demands and girls suggest. Boys boast, interrupt, and heckle and tease, and girls listen and acknowledge and agree with others to keep things calm. They talk about connections. Boys are more about hierarchies and who's got more power, usually physical. You can watch all these things on the playground. This is mostly genetic, but of course it's reinforced by families and a culture, isn't it? So you'll see differences in cultures, but not enough difference to override genetics on average. What we want kids to generate is initiative. Initiative is the ability to offer new solutions, to begin new projects, to seek new social encounters, to have an active imagination. And so parents could reinforce this. That's ideal. Reinforce their freedom to play, encourage their initiation, ask them questions, answer their questions, let them be imaginative, yeah? That develops what we call purpose. And without purpose, we get pathological guilt and inhibition. Inhibition is the restraint or suppression of thought and behavior and lack of initiative. They don't want to start things, right? And that guilt is pathological. So guilt can be normative and useful. It can inhibit doing something bad or make us feel badly about having done something that's wrong. But that's ordinary guilt, not pathological guilt. That can arise over almost anything. They start something, feel guilty. Create something, feel guilty. They discourage children's inquisitiveness and their curiosity. They're beginning new things. They don't like that at all. Identification helps kids get through this stage. This is the process of putting the values and ideals and standards and requirements and beliefs of someone else, usually your same-sex parent, into you. Could be parents, but usually parents, could be teachers, maybe grandparents sometimes. It produces allegiance and closeness. It has a protective factor in that way. It ensures more positive emotional connections, more bonding with a parent. Okay? And so that's where we're going to leave it. This one video is all that you will see on this one subject because I ran this one a little long. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.